So this is the valedictory session, and we start with a brief sharing by Professor, you should be Professor by now, General Dipankar Banerjee. And it's a great pleasure for me because both Dipankar as well as Uday have been great supporters of WISCOMP and have always been there for us and encouraged us in our work. So I just want to introduce you formally before I move on. And I mean, all of you know both of them, but I think it's still protocol that I will follow. General Dipankar Banerjee, who will make some opening remarks, is a retired Major General of the Indian Army and the founding director of the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, where many of the scholars who shared their chapter out abstracts began their careers. And so he's been a mentor to a generation of young people in the peace and conflict studies space. He served as the deputy director of IDSA, and he was also a senior fellow there, and as the director of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies in Colombo, where I had the opportunity to interact with him and watch him do a great job promoting South Asian, shall I say, discourse, dialogue, and CBMs, if I may say so. He held a visiting fellowship at the United States Institute of Peace and also the Henry Simpson Center, USA. He's been a consultant to the United Nations on the Conventional Arms Register and was an international advisor to the ICRC. General Banerjee has been an instructor at the Indian Military Academy, the College of Combat, and the Defense Services Staff College in India. In recognition of his distinguished service to the Indian Army, he received the prestigious military honor of Ati Vishisht Seva Medal from the President of India. His areas of interest include South Asian foreign policies and security issues, CBMs, and Asia-Pacific security, with a special emphasis on Chinese security issues. He has edited several books including Comprehensive and Cooperative Security in South Asia, CBMs in South Asia, Potential and Possibilities, South Asia at Gunpoint, Small Arms and Light Weapons Proliferation. I'll also take this opportunity to introduce our valedictorian, valedictory speaker. It's very difficult to introduce Commodore Uday Bhaskar in conventional, shall I say, vocabulary. I'm not quite sure where he sits, whether he sits with the military establishment or with the peace constituency. Let me say, he wears many hats and is equally at home in many worlds, beloved by each of the worlds which don't talk to each other. So hopefully he will be the bridge to take this conversation forward in many significant ways. Thanks to the very good influence of his wife, he's a committed feminist. And so when we have him at WISCOMP, it's almost as if we are listening to ourselves. So it's a great deal of comfort. But as you know, so now I will share his formal bio profile with you because I can't do the whole bio data; it's too long. He, as you know, sound like an obituary, is one of India's leading experts on security and strategic affairs, and director of the Society for Policy Studies, now in New Delhi. He retired from the Indian Navy after 37 years of distinguished service, and he has the rare distinction of heading 3 think tanks. He was previously director, National Maritime Foundation, and was earlier with the IDSA, and then of course he was the officiating director there. And he is also on the global strategic developments that submitted its report to the PM or Prime Minister of India. Commodore Bhaskar was editor, Maritime Affairs and Strategic Analysis. We all refer to strategic analysis with great, shall I say, sense of comfort and gusto. he was a lecturer at the Indian National Defense College, NATO College, Rome, and the Foreign Service Institute, US State Department. He was a visiting scholar in international security at McGill University, Montreal, Canada, under the aegis of the Center for International Peace and Security Studies. A recipient of the Vishisht Seva Medal and the Prime Minister's Letter of Commendation, he is a life member of the USI. It also gives me great pleasure to tell you that he occasionally consented to be a guest lecturer at Lady Shri Ram College. And so our association goes back many years. So over to Dipankar for your words of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, and a very good afternoon to all of you. It has been a fascinating day, some outstanding presentations, and so happy to see that real disarmament issues are getting mainstreamed today in our discourse. And this, of course, has to be led by women. I do not want to go and explain that why, but I think all of us would naturally agree to it. All the leading peacemakers, and that trend is coming back in the world all over. I'll probably highlight a few of those. The topic, I'm not the valedictorian, so it is Uday, and we are all here to listen to him. We go back a long way. I think about 30 odd years ago, we shared adjacent cubicles in the supper house in the IDSA, and dividing was a cardboard line. Yes. So anything that was happening on the other side of it, one knew. And of course, we admired his work over the years and the dynamism that he has displayed in that as something remarkable. I didn't want to make it, of course, the topic given to me was here and now. By here and now, I interpret as here as to where are we, and now as to what needs to be done. And I'll focus very briefly a few comments directed in that. But let me just say first straight away that we are now indeed in very challenging times. Since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the world today is closest to a possible nuclear Armageddon. The early time was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and in the Cuban Missile Crisis, as you know, that it was a very touch and go situation. Robert McNamara, the Defense Secretary during that period, including the Bay of Pigs, and after he retired from the World Bank as president, he wrote a very detailed book on the Cuban War. And soon after, he came to India and discussed with that over 2 days with us in Delhi at the IDSA. I think Uday would remember. And at that time, it was quite apparent, of course, the Russians, the Soviet Union had sent the missiles to Cuba, and those missiles are known, of course, known to the USA, but also because of the situation, the permission to deliver those missiles were actually given to the Russian force commanders on the spot, which is something which is never done in nuclear doctrine or nuclear situations, because that is the ultimate authority of the head of government or whoever is the authority to give that permission. And without that, a nuclear weapon cannot be sent. But that was delegated to the local commanders. It was a touch and go situation. We're lucky we came out of that. And after that, we of course have the current situation. And current situation in Ukraine has brought the nuclear war situation to the heart of Europe. I wonder how many of you saw Putin's addressing a group of senior Russian ladies, 3 days ago, shown over the CNN. Pardon? No. Yes, mothers of soldiers. Mothers of soldiers, and Putin was trying to reassure them that do not believe the propaganda of the West. Your sons are doing a gallant job, and indicating perhaps that I feel your pain, and he would probably feel that pain even more when those soldiers would probably die in nuclear radiation cloud, and that, of course, may well be passed on to somebody else because the Russian soldiers are defending the Russian territory in Ukraine against the Nazi attackers. And it's in that context he has perhaps taken a step further towards nuclearization of this actual situation there. Now, I would have liked it to be more of a conversation between Reshmi and others who are here, and many of them my close associates in the think tanks that I headed. Instead of my mentoring them, I think I learned a lot from them. And in that context, let me say that the challenge now on nuclear disarmament is again come to the fore. The world is prepared and ready to address these issues, not yet for disarmament, and therefore the initiative still lies with us to try and do something about it. It is possible to do it. It is not a reality, whatever the logic and understanding given by others, that nuclear weapons are an essential element. God has given it to us, it will never go away, and therefore we have to live with it in all its horrendous possible consequences. You know, it is true, the nuclear weapons, in a sense, the mutual assured deterrence doctrine that emerged out of the possession of nuclear weapons by both sides, perhaps even multiple sides, has perhaps deterred conflict, deterred war, prevented a war from breaking out, because the mutual assured destruction as a policy was supposed to apply, and hence no side would initiate a nuclear weapon strike because it knew full well that the other side would have the capability of wiping you out entirely and as a retaliation measure. Now, that was broken when this happened, because mutual assured deterrence was destruction was actually supposed to prevent the war, and hence Margaret Thatcher in 1986 said that nuclear weapons have preserved the peace in Europe for 50 years, and hence mutual assured deterrence has worked. But that's not really the entire story, because I know, and here personal listening, about 50 years and 11 days ago, I was in Germany, and for 5 days I was the NATO forces commander. This, of course, was a simulation war exercise in Europe, comprising of about 150 military officers from around the world, not merely from the NATO, of course substantial, but from around the world. And the situation was that with Russian superiority clearly established at that time, 50 years ago, the only way of preventing the Soviet capture of all of Europe was through force. And so the task given to us, this 150 odd officers, young and whatever, and to find a doctrine for it. I still remember Michael Howard, and we had a 15-month period for discussing all elements of it. Last 2 months focused entirely on war in Europe. And I think somebody mentioned earlier in the morning session, gents, we should, before we understand anything about the nuclear doctrine or mutual assured deterrence, what is a nuclear weapon capable of doing? And the first lecture in our that last 2 months schedule was by Professor Michael Howard, Professor of War Studies and the first generation of nuclear deterrence doctrine specialist and all that. He is one of those persons who shaped it. And he's describing to us in an introductory talk the effect on London of a 10 megaton nuclear aerial explosion. And of course, describing then at great length that utter devastation. London will not be a city anymore, whatever the population of its this thing was in 1972. And a 10 megaton bomb was, well, the bombs that detonated at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 10 to 12 kilotons. So you can imagine the scale of escalation. And of course, biggest bomb available to Russia at that time was a 60 megaton bomb called the Big Bertha. Anyway, so that was the situation at that time, and so therefore nuclear deterrence should be highly questioned. The situation was that the Soviet Union would attack, and unable to defend it territorially, because it was expected and assessed that the Soviet forces would reach the Atlantic in 3 weeks, and the only way to defend Germany was through force. And as the NATO forces command, I still remember I used a 50 kiloton nuclear bomb 1500 feet above the Soviet armored division in western part of Germany, eastern part of Germany. Now, the only thing saving grace perhaps of that was at that time a permission to use nuclear weapons would require 16 NATO countries to all certify and legitimize their use. Till then it was not supposed to be, and safeguards were probably available to prevent that from happening. But today, such restraints, such possibilities exist even less. So therefore what I'm trying to say is that the possibility of a nuclear weapons exchange in Europe today and now, in spite of all the precautions, all the measures taken, remains unacceptably high. And that is the challenge that is there in front of us. To Reshmi and to Ruhi and where are the others? And Tanvi, where are they? It is up to you. That challenge has to be borne by us. And once again, it is the women who will have to take the lead. I don't want to go into the details as to why, again. But it is in that context that in that sense, the impossibility of such a measure is not to be considered as a deterrent. It is more a challenge. And here, just for generalization perhaps, I'd briefly like to mention 2 women leaders who are currently have played a dominant role in disarmament. One, of course, that I'd like to mention is Joan Rolfing, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Nuclear Threat Initiative. Many of you would know. She has some JNU associationship. I will not mention that to anybody else. But she has been responsible to propagate, create ideas, organize, mobilize resources, enormous amount of resources. And Ted Turner has been one of the owner of the CNN then, was a primary source of many of the guns that's in Asia and the world. I've known her for over 30 years, worked with her closely. She has helped me enormously in some of the activities that I've done in trying to address nuclear issues all over the world, especially in our situation in Asia. It's a remarkable, and she is, of course, the person who led the Global Zero movement as well. And the Global Zero movement, when she got the leading strategic thinkers in the world to come together and to create a situation and an environment where this process could be taken forward. That's a remarkable leadership. Second, another is somebody who is a Nobel laureate, Jody Williams. In 1997, she got the Nobel Peace Prize for her organization, the International Coalition to Ban Landmines, to eliminate landmines from the world. And in 1997, she succeeded, and anti-personnel landmines are banned. It's a weapon of war. Armies would like to use it, but has been banned under the United Nations Treaty. And this has been possible. I've gone around the world and been associated with her for formulating the doctrine for banning it, preparing the documents for it, taken part in the drafting session to prepare the law for the United Nations to pass, and finally convincing many countries around the world, all the continents, regarding this, and finally had the privilege of being at the special United Nations General Assembly session at Ottawa when this was finally signed by all the necessary members who had agreed to, member countries who had agreed to go along with it. Now, it is in that background I would like to suggest that a time for mobilization and activation has come. And there are positive trends, particularly I would suggest in India. Prime Minister Modi's statement regarding this is not an era of war and we must have dialogue and discussion to bring about peace is a question and has been accepted around the world, incorporated in the G20 statement recently, and that legitimizes, in a sense, once again, at a high level, the acceptance that this can be prevented and we need to move in that direction. With the G20 presidency with us for one more year, and with the current developments, I would ask my friends, once again, Reshmi, Ruhi, Tanvi, and others, what do you do about it? How do you mobilize the world opinion and bring about the possibility of change? Jodie Williams did it just on her own. Remarkable capability of mobilization. Of course, Joan Rolfing's contribution was more substantive, perhaps much more important. But it is a possibility that is there. Can one reach out and seize it and make it happen? Much work ahead. Thank you very much and all the best to you.
Thank you, General Banerjee, for so generously sharing the personal as well as the political engagements around disarmament and that exhortation for action. In a way, a peaceful call to arms. Thank you ever so much.